Hello, I'm Arpita Bedekar from Fintelekt Advisory Services. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm going to take you through the summary of the Financial Action Task Force plenary meeting, which was held in a hybrid format in Berlin, Germany, from June 14th to 17th. The Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF, it is the international standard-setting body for anti-money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism, and countering the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And the outcomes of this plenary have a huge impact then on the regulatory standards and guidance issued by countries around the world. The video that I'm presenting today, the findings, they're based on a summary of the proceedings which has been published by the FATF on their website. So you can read up if you would like to know a little more in detail. This was the last plenary held under the German presidency of Dr. Markus Player, and the presidency will shift to Mr. Raja Kumar of Singapore. So here is a quick summary of the proceedings of the 4 days of discussion. The FATF made a statement on the Russia-Ukraine situation. The mutual evaluation reports of Germany and the Netherlands were discussed. There were some changes to the grey list. There were also a few reports that were taken up for discussion, which will be published through the course of the next 3 months. Those were on real estate, on information sharing and data protection, on beneficial ownership, on VASPs, that is virtual asset service providers and virtual assets. And then, of course, there were some priority areas which were defined under the next presidency. So let's look at some of these in more detail over the next few slides. So the FATF expressed its deepest sympathies for the people of Ukraine, and they acknowledged that Russian actions over Ukraine run counter to the FATF core principles, and they represent a violation of the commitment to international cooperation and mutual respect that the FATF stands for. And because of that, the FATF has decided to severely limit the Russian Federation's role and influence within the FATF. Russia can no longer hold any leadership or advisory roles. They can't take part in decision making on standard setting or FATF peer review processes, governance, and membership matters. They will also no longer be able to provide assessors, reviewers, or other experts for FATF peer review processes. The FATF further reiterated that all jurisdictions should be vigilant to possible emerging risks from the circumvention of measures taken in order to protect the international financial system. The mutual evaluation reports of Germany and the Netherlands were discussed during the plenary. For Germany, the mutual evaluation report has noted that Germany has made improvements to its AML-CFT framework, and the technical compliance with FATF standards is quite strong, and the country has taken positive steps to develop a stronger national understanding of money laundering and terror financing risks, and to improve coordination between the federal and the state governments, and they have boosted really human resources in key institutions. However, some of these reforms are not yet fully effective, and in particular, the improvement areas which were suggested were for effective supervision of the private sector, availability and access to beneficial ownership information, development and use of financial intelligence by the financial intelligence unit and the law enforcement agencies, and in prioritizing money laundering investigations and prosecutions. For the Netherlands, again, the assessment found a strong technical compliance with FATF standards, and there were notable improvements to the framework. Netherlands has a robust system of domestic cooperation and coordination at both the policy and operation levels, and for the use of data and investigation and development of financial intelligence. The improvement areas, again, which were identified for the Netherlands, regulation of virtual asset service providers, prevention of legal persons from being used for criminal purposes, access to adequate, accurate, and current beneficial ownership information, and strengthening risk-based supervision and allocating adequate resources to tackling unlicensed activities. So in terms of changes to the grey list, which is the list of jurisdictions under increased monitoring, Gibraltar was added to this list. In particular, the strategic deficiencies which were identified for Gibraltar were in the areas of improving supervision for non-bank financial institutions and for designated non-financial businesses and professions, or DNFPBs, using a range of effective, proportionate, and dissuasive sanctions, and demonstrating more results in criminal or civil proceedings based on financial investigations. So Gibraltar in particular has a large gambling sector with international fund flows, and it needs to take steps to focus on gatekeepers, including gambling operators, and strengthen controls for them. There were also some conflicting reports in the media regarding the status of Pakistan in the grey list. The official update from FATF is that Pakistan has completed its action plan, which involved 34 action items, and it will now have an on-site evaluation to verify this implementation, following which it may be taken off the grey list, subject to meeting all the requirements. And Malta, which is another Moneyval member, just like Gibraltar, it was taken off the list because it met its action plan suggested by the FATF. So the net number of countries that are currently on the list of jurisdictions with strategic deficiencies remains at 23, sorry. And here is a list of those 23 countries. Now coming to the strategic initiatives, an important one is a FATF targeted update on implementation of the FATF standards on virtual assets and virtual asset service providers, travel rule, and other developments. So the plenary discussed a targeted update on the implementation of the FATF's travel rule. Travel rule is basically, the VASPs are required to collect or to send information on the identities of the originator and beneficiary of that transaction with the transaction itself. So a report which will be published end of June, it will highlight basically the findings were released in advance, and it shows that the slow introduction of regulations in many countries is leaving a significant gap, and it's creating vulnerabilities for the criminal misuse of the VASPs. So it stresses upon an urgent need for jurisdictions to implement and enforce the travel rule. In addition, the report provides a brief update on emerging risks and market developments in areas such as decentralized finance, which is the DeFi, non-fungible tokens, that's NFTs, and unhosted wallets. The next initiative is on information sharing and data protection. It's worth mentioning that the FATF held a conference on digital transformation in the week before the plenary, and it has been already encouraging very much the use of technology and innovation. It's also proactively engaging with a range of data protection and privacy organizations, so DPP organizations, to encourage greater compatibility of DPP and AML requirements. So this has been one of the key challenges which have been identified by the private sector to greater innovation, which is the balance between DPP and AML requirements. So again, a new report will be published in July, and it will provide observations and lessons learned from the members of the FATF and its global network who have increased private sector information sharing while meeting domestic data protection and privacy objectives and obligations. And that report is also going to provide some learnings for countries that wish to embark on private sector information sharing mechanisms and initiatives. So on the real estate sector, there was a public consultation on a draft guidelines which was released in March, the plenary in March, and it concluded in April. And the FATF has finalized that guidance for the real estate sector. That will also be published in July, and that's going to provide a better understanding of the ML and TF risks and the implementation of risk-based measures for prevention for the real estate sector. Next, an important one on beneficial ownership information, and again discussions around this started in the previous plenary meeting. And there are two parts to this new guidance. One is on implementing FATF standards on beneficial ownership information for legal persons. The other one is on trusts and other legal arrangements. So for legal persons, there'll be a draft guidance which will seek views from targeted stakeholders, and then the guidance will be finalized and published by October 2022. And on the other one, the FATF is considering amendments to strengthen recommendation 25, which applies to trusts and other legal arrangements. Again, for this, a white paper is being released for public consultation, and the FATF is seeking views, particularly on the scope of legal arrangements, risk assessment, foreign trusts, obligations of trustees, definition of beneficial owners, approaches in collecting beneficial ownership, adequate, accurate, and up-to-date information, and obstacles to transparency. Again, the deadline for comments is 1st of August, and you can look up the website if you would wish to submit your feedback on this. So on implementing the strategic vision to strengthen the global network, a set of actions were approved, which will support the March 2022 strategic vision to enhance the inclusiveness and cohesiveness of the global network of 206 jurisdictions and FATF-style regional bodies. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Marcus Player from Germany has stepped down, and the next FATF presidency will now be with Singapore, and Mr. T. Raja Kumar will take over on 1st of July, and he will also release his set of priorities on that day. But there were some focus areas which were discussed by FATF members in April, and the Singapore presidency is expected to continue along these lines. And these priority areas are strengthening asset recovery and international cooperation in combating cross-border financial crime, especially cyber-enabled fraud, scams, and ransomware, strengthening the use of data analytics and public-private partnerships, and closely collaborating with FATF-style regional bodies or the FSRBs to enhance their capabilities and capacity. So that really was an overview of the discussions at the plenary. I hope it was useful for you, and we will bring you a video summary of the next meeting, which will take place in October. So thank you once again for joining me today, and have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.